I'm sitting in the same house I spent most of my life paying for, and there are days when it feels like a museum built for somebody else. The walls still hold the photographs. The shelves still carry the little traces of family life. But the voices are gone now. The noise is gone. And the terrible thing is, I thought there would always be more time. My name is Arthur. I'm an old man now, old enough to understand that life rarely falls apart all at once. Most of the damage happens quietly while you're busy convincing yourself you're doing the right thing. I'm not telling you this because I want pity. I had a good life in many ways, better than the life my father had, better than what I came from. I worked hard. I provided. I kept the lights on. I did what men were taught to do. But there's a difference between providing for a family and actually being with them. I didn't understand that until most of my chances were already gone. When I was younger, I believed time worked like savings. I thought if you sacrificed enough now, you could enjoy the rewards later. Later dinners, later vacations, later conversations, later forgiveness. Later became my favorite word. My wife used to tease me about it when we were first married. She'd ask if we could take the kids to the lake on Sunday, and I'd say, next weekend. She'd ask if we could visit her parents before winter came, and I'd say, after things calm down. Things never calmed down. I met my wife when we were both still young enough to think exhaustion was temporary. She laughed easily back then. I remember that clearly. Not loud laughter, softer than that, the kind that made a room feel warmer. We rented a tiny apartment over a hardware store. The pipes rattled in winter. The kitchen floor leaned slightly to one side. We didn't care. At night, we'd sit at the table eating cheap pasta while the radio played softly near the window. We talked about the future like it was something guaranteed. Children, a house, stability, more room, better years ahead. And to be fair, some of that happened. I got a decent job with a transportation company. Long hours, but reliable work. Reliable mattered to me. My father had spent half his life unemployed and angry about it. I swore my family would never feel that kind of uncertainty. So I worked. That's really the center of this whole story. I worked, and I believed the work itself was proof of love. When our first child was born, I remember standing beside the hospital bed, staring at him in complete disbelief. He was so small. I touched his hand with one finger because I was afraid of hurting him. I promised myself right there that he would have everything I never had. And I think I kept that promise in the practical sense. He had clothes, food, birthday presents, a roof that didn't leak. What he didn't always have was me. At the time, I didn't think those absences mattered very much. Children are resilient, people said. Families understand sacrifice. A man has responsibilities. I held on to those ideas because they made my choices easier to live with. There are memories that return to me now in pieces. My daughter, standing in the doorway holding a drawing she made while I was halfway through reading paperwork at the kitchen table. Me nodding without really looking. My son asking if I could come to one of his school games. Me saying I'd try. That word again. Try. I did go sometimes. Enough that I could still think of myself as a present father, but not enough for the children to stop scanning the bleachers when they walked onto the field. I didn't notice those moments then. Not fully. Children hide disappointment differently than adults. They adapt. They stop asking as much. That should frighten people more than it does. The strange thing about being busy is how noble it feels while it's happening. You walk around tired all the time, and people respect you for it. They praise your work ethic. They call you dependable. Nobody pulls you aside and says, "Be careful. Your family is slowly learning how to live without you." If someone had said that to me back then, I probably would have gotten defensive because I loved them. That was never the issue. I just thought love could wait until I had more energy, more money, more time. There was one summer my wife wanted us all to take a trip together. Nothing expensive, just a week near the water in a rented cabin. The kids were still young enough to be excited about board games and roasted marshmallows. I told her work was too busy. I remember the look on her face. Not anger. Worse than that. Recognition. Like she already knew what my answer would be before I gave it. She took the kids without me. I stayed home, working late at the office, telling myself I was being responsible. Years later, I found one of the photographs from that trip in an old drawer. My wife and the children were smiling in front of the lake. There was an empty space beside them where I probably would have stood. I stared at that picture for a long time. You can miss your own life without realizing it while it's happening. The years moved quickly after that, faster than I thought possible. Teenagers in the house, then young adults, then people with their own schedules, their own relationships, their own reasons not to call as often. At first, I blamed normal life. Everybody gets busy, everybody grows up, but somewhere deep down, I knew something else had happened too. We had become polite with each other. That's the word that hurts me most now. Polite. My children called on holidays. They visited occasionally. Conversation stayed near the surface. Work, weather, traffic. Nothing difficult. Nothing vulnerable. I used to wonder why they told their mother things they never told me. Now I understand. People open their hearts where they feel consistently seen. My wife tried to warn me in quieter ways over the years, not arguments. She wasn't dramatic. She'd say things like, "They miss you," or "You don't get these years back." And I would nod while barely listening because some part of me believed family was permanent, no matter how little attention you gave it. That belief cost me more than I knew. The turning point came slowly, then all at once. My wife got sick, not suddenly. It started with exhaustion, small symptoms, doctor visits that became more frequent. I went to appointments when I could. Even then, I was still balancing phone calls, schedules, work obligations. I look back at that now with a kind of disbelief. The woman I loved was sitting in medical offices, worrying about her future, and part of my attention was still trapped inside spreadsheets and deadlines. You tell yourself you're managing everything. That's what adults do. Manage things. But illness has a way of exposing what matters and what never really did. One afternoon, after an appointment, we sat in the car in complete silence for several minutes. Then she looked at me and said, very calmly, "I spent most of my life waiting for you to be less busy." That sentence has followed me for years, because she wasn't trying to hurt me when she said it. She was simply tired of protecting me from the truth. She passed away 3 years later. People imagine grief arriving like an explosion. For me, it felt more like a long hallway growing quieter and quieter until there was nothing left at the end of it. After the funeral, the house became unbearable at night. No television in the background, no footsteps upstairs, no voice asking if I remembered to lock the door. Just silence, real silence. And in that silence, memories started arriving with painful clarity. The school games I missed, the dinners I rushed through, the conversations postponed because I was too distracted, the weekends I spent catching up on work while my children slowly stopped expecting me to join them. I used to think regret came from doing bad things. Sometimes it comes from doing reasonable things for too long. That's harder to explain to yourself. My children still speak to me. I want to make that clear. They are not cruel people. They check on me. They visit when they can. But there are emotional distances that settle into families quietly over decades. Nobody announces them. Nobody chooses them in one dramatic moment. They simply grow. And once people learn how to live without needing you emotionally, they rarely return to needing you the same way again. That realization nearly broke me after my wife died. I remember one particular evening, winter, dark outside by 5 o'clock. I was sitting alone in the living room when I realized I didn't actually know certain things about my own children anymore, their fears, their daily routines, the details of who they had become. I knew practical things, addresses, jobs, the names of their spouses, but intimacy requires time, and time was exactly what I kept trading away. That's the cruel exchange nobody warns you about. You can spend your whole life building security for people while quietly starving the relationship itself. And by the time you notice, everyone has adapted to the emotional distance. I don't blame my children for that. Honestly, I admire them for building full lives despite my absences. But I grieve it. I grieve the version of our family that might have existed if I'd understood sooner that presence matters more than perfection. If you're listening to this, I don't want you to hear accusation in my voice. I'm not saying work is meaningless. It isn't. Responsibility matters. Providing matters. But there's a point where duty becomes a hiding place. I think that happened to me. Being busy protected me from uncomfortable things, emotional conversations, vulnerability, slowing down long enough to notice how quickly everybody was changing. I thought I was sacrificing for my family. Sometimes I wonder if part of me was also hiding inside the sacrifice because it felt safer than closeness. Old age strips away excuses. At some point, you stop saying, "I was busy," and start asking whether the busyness was worth the cost. For me, some of it was, but not all of it. Not even close. Now I spend most mornings near the window in the front room. Same chair every day. Same quiet neighborhood. Occasionally, one of my children calls. Occasionally, one of the grandchildren visits. And those moments mean everything to me now. Not because they erase the past. They don't. But because time becomes incredibly precious once you understand how little of it was ever guaranteed. If this story means something to you, then maybe just sit with that thought for a while. Not guilt, not panic, just awareness. The people you love are changing while you're distracted. They are growing older while you postpone things. Relationships do not stay frozen waiting for a convenient season to finally pay attention. I learned that too late. And now when the house gets quiet at night, I sometimes think about that small apartment above the hardware store, the rattling pipes, the cheap dinners, my wife laughing softly at the table while we talked about all the years ahead of us. Back then, I truly believed time was endless. I know better now.